History is often described as something written by the victors. But sometimes, the truth is hidden. And sometimes, the truth is locked away. For decades, the Soviet Union was one of the most closed states in the world. Documents were classified. Archives were sealed. Facts were restricted. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, it was not only a state that fell. An archive was opened, and that archive would change how history was understood. Chapter 1. The memory of a closed state. The Soviet system was built on information control. Archives were not just records of history. They were instruments of power. They contained war reports, political decisions, classified operations, internal economic data. Most of this information remained inaccessible to the public. There was an official history, and there was the documented reality. Chapter 2. What the archives revealed in the early 1990s. Selected archives became accessible to The first revelations were significant. There were clear differences between official narratives and documented records. Among the major findings, the scale of political repression during the Stalin era was far greater than publicly acknowledged. Actual mortality figures in the Gulag system had been underreported. Economic production data had been manipulated. Certain military failures were omitted from official accounts. History had not only been written, it had been curated. Chapter 3. Erased people. Altered records. During the Soviet era, not only documents, but individuals disappeared from records. Photographs were edited. Names were removed. Official references were erased. When someone fell out of political favor, their existence could be read. When archives opened, these alterations became visible. Historical gaps suddenly had explanations. Chapter 4. War records and hidden losses. World War II was presented as the defining victory of the Soviet state, and it was indeed decisive. However, archival material revealed additional complexity. Casualty numbers were higher than previously published. Operational mistakes were minimized in official reports. Strategic withdrawals were reframed for propaganda purposes. This does not diminish the significance of the victory, but it shows that the full picture was more nuanced. Chapter 5. Economic realities behind the system. The planned economy was officially portrayed as strong and productive. Internal reports told a more complicated story. Production figures were sometimes inflated. Resource shortages were more widespread than publicly admitted. Structural weaknesses were documented internally. The state projected stability. The archives revealed strain. Chapter 6. Intelligence files and covert operations. Some declassified materials provided insight into Cold War activities. These included covert foreign operations, intelligence networks, disinformation campaigns, strategic geopolitical interventions. These records expanded understanding of global tensions during the Cold War. They did not rewrite world history overnight, but they deepened it. Chapter 7. How history was rewritten. When the archives opened, history itself did not change. The events remained the same, but interpretation changed. Historical understanding became more complex, more human, more evidenceable. Said history is shaped by access to documentation, and documentation shapes collective memory. Final section. The lesson of the open files. The opening of Soviet archives demonstrates a broader principle. States can control information. Systems can restrict access. Narratives can be managed, but documentation remains. And over time, archives speak. The collapse of the Soviet Union was a geopolitical transformation. The opening of its archives was a historical one. Today, we re-dive in deep into a topic that completely revolutionized our understanding of the 20th century. The opening of the Soviet archives. What really happened behind the Iron Curtain? For decades, historians had to piece together the story of the Soviet Union from official propaganda, second-hand accounts, and whatever scraps of information they could find. It was like trying to solve a massive puzzle with most of the pieces missing. But then, in the late 1980s and early 90s, as the Soviet Union began to crumble, the unthinkable happened. The doors to its vast, secret archives creaked open. Imagine millions upon millions of documents, from top-secret Politburo meeting minutes to the personal letters of ordinary citizens. suddenly becoming accessible. It was a historian's dream come true, and it triggered what many have called an archival revolution. This wasn't just about adding a few footnotes to history books. It was about rewriting entire chapters. The secrets held within these files had the power to confirm long-held suspicions, debunk stubborn myths, and reveal truths that were far stranger and more complex than anyone had imagined. It was a seismic shift that continues to shape our understanding of one of the most powerful and enigmatic empires in modern history. So, what were some of the biggest revelations? Let's start with the big one. Joseph Stalin. Before the archives opened, the scale of his terror was heavily debated. How many people were truly affected by the purges, the gulags, and the forced famines? The newly accessible documents provided chillingly precise answers. We could now see the execution quotas, signed by Stalin himself. We could read the reports from local NKVD officers detailing the arrests and interrogations. The numbers were staggering, far exceeding many Western estimates. For example, the archives revealed the horrific truth of the Katyn forest massacre in 1940, where nearly 22,000 Polish officers and intellectuals were executed by the Soviet secret police. For 50 years, the USSR had blamed the Nazis. The documents proved otherwise, with the execution order bearing the signature of Stalin and other Politburo members. It was a bombshell that reshaped Polish-Russian relations and our understanding of Soviet wartime brutality. The archives also gave us a much more nuanced view of the Cold War. The traditional narrative often painted it as a simple ideological struggle between two superpowers, but the documents revealed a far messier reality. We learned how close the world came to nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Reading the frantic telegrams between Moscow and its embassy in Havana, we saw evidence of the deep paranoia and frequent miscalculations on both sides. For instance, the files showed that the Soviets genuinely feared a surprise nuclear attack from NATO during a 1983 military exercise called Able Archer. This war scare was far more serious than Western intelligence had realized at the time. These revelations force us to see the Cold War not just as a grand chess match, but as a series of risky gambles, and driven by fear and flawed information on both ends. It wasn't just about high-level politics, either. The archives opened a window into the everyday lives of Soviet citizens. Through personal letters, diaries, and petitions to the government, we could hear their voices directly. We learned about their struggles with food shortages, their secret love for banned Western music, their quiet acts of defiance, and their genuine moments of belief in the communist project. This history from below painted a much richer and more human picture of Soviet society. It challenged the monolithic image of a brainwashed population, revealing a complex tapestry of compliance, resistance, and simple survival. It showed us people trying to live ordinary lives under extraordinary circumstances, a perspective that was often lost in the grand narratives of geopolitics. However, the story doesn't end there. The archival revolution has faced significant challenges. Access to these documents has never been straightforward. In the 90s, there was a period of relative openness, often called the archival honeymoon. But since the early 2000s, under Vladimir Putin's leadership, the tide has turned. Many of the most sensitive archives, especially those related to intelligence and military operations, have been The process for researchers to gain access has become more bureaucratic and restrictive. There's a growing trend in Russia to promote a more sanitized, heroic version of its Soviet past, which directly conflicts with the often dark truths found in the archives. This makes the work of historians more difficult and politically charged than ever. Furthermore, just because a document is declassified doesn't mean its meaning is clear. Interpretation is a huge challenge. Soviet documents are filled with jargon, coded language, and ideological spin. A report might be written to please a superior rather than to reflect reality. Historians have to act like detectives, cross-referencing sources, understanding the context in which a document was created, and reading between the lines to uncover the true story. For example, is a glowing report about a factory's production genuine, or is it an attempt to cover up massive failures? Unraveling these layers of meaning is a painstaking process that requires deep expertise in Soviet history and culture. So, where does this leave us? The opening of the Soviet archives was a monumental event in historical research. It demolished old myths and provided a foundation for a more accurate, detailed, and human understanding of the Soviet Union. The revelations about the scale of Stalin's terror, The inner workings of the Cold War and the daily lives of citizens have fundamentally reshaped the field. But the work is far from over. The ongoing challenges of restricted access and complex interpretation mean that the archives still hold many secrets. Historians continue to fight for access and debate the meanings of these incredible sources. It's a powerful reminder that history is not a static collection of facts, but a dynamic and ongoing process of discovery, interpretation, and revision. The story of the Soviet archives is the story of our continuing quest for the truth. Thanks so much for watching.